and welcome to Qubit Education. In this lesson, we are going to compare and contrast for GCSE English. This is mainly for the Edexcel specification. And in this lesson, what we're going to do is we're going to understand the words compare and contrast, and we're going to learn some vocabulary to help you to compare and contrast in the exam. Finally, we're going to look at some past exam questions, specifically answering questions 7A and 7B of the Edexcel English Language Paper 2. So what does compare and contrast actually mean? When we compare something, what we're doing is we are looking at the similarities and the differences between two things. Now, for GCSE, that usually means we're looking at the similarities and differences between two texts. Okay? A contrast is a bit like a bigger difference. Okay, so a contrast is just mainly a difference. All right, but a comparison is looking at similarities and differences. And that's what you've got to do, look at similarities and differences. Now, whilst you're doing your revision, it might help you to do this as a list. Okay, so if you have two texts in front of you, you could write down a list of the similarities that you find between those two texts as you read through them, or you can look at the differences. And you can look at the differences and you can write those down in a list. Okay, you could have probably 2 columns, and that would help you then to answer your question quite quickly. In the exam, you might not be able to do that quite as quick because obviously you don't want to waste too much time in the exam. But during your revision, it might help you to do that so that you're able to do that very quickly when you do get to the exam. Another way you could do that is using a Venn diagram. I'm going to show you an example of a Venn diagram just now. Okay, a Venn diagram is basically 2 circles that overlap. All right, so like this. It says compare and contrast chart, but it's also known as a Venn diagram. And we might say that we find all the things that we find in text 1 that are individual would go in there. And all the things we find in text 2 that are individual would go in there. However, all the similarities, all the things that we find that are the same, there could be similarities in language or structure or the theme of the writing, they would go in here. What's the same? I know it's not a very big diagram, so it'd be difficult, but you can draw it as big as you want, and you don't have to write full sentences. It can just be little ideas that give you that will then allow you to write full sentences. And we'll look at in detail at how to write those full sentences in a minute. Okay, so it's just 2 ways there that you can help yourself to compare and contrast 2 texts quite quickly with some notes, and then for you then to go and be able to put them into sentences. What we're going to do now is we're going to just look at a few examples of some compare and contrast sentences so you can see how the words are used, what kind of language is used in order to compare. Okay, so this first example here is about 2 phone plans. I know it's not necessarily relevant to a particular text that you've looked at GCSE, but I'm just looking at the language. It says here, these phones are equally amazing. However, this mobile plan costs 5p per minute, whereas that one gives you up to 800 minutes per month for a fixed price. So you can see there that the language that's been used is showing you that, first of all, these 2 phones are both good. They are equally amazing. Then the word however is used, meaning that they're going to move on to say something else. They've then told you about one plan. Then they've used the word whereas, meaning they're going to compare it now. And that one gives you up to 800 minutes per month for a fixed price. So the language used there automatically shows, and it sticks out, that is comparing 2 different things. Okay, this second example talks about 2 bosses or 2 employers. Our bosses are both great. His boss allows him to work from home, unlike mine. Okay, so in this case, they're talking about how both of their bosses are great people. However, one can work from home, and the one boss lets him work from home and the other one doesn't. Okay. Now, this one, which is a little bit like what you're going to have to write for GCSE, starts with the word whereas. so you know they're going to compare straight away. Whereas the purpose of text 1 is to inform, text 3 is more persuasive. Okay, that's a good sentence, but you're going to need to be a bit more detailed than that. Okay, and I'll show you some examples of that soon. A little bit better is this one. It says, both texts show things changing for new parents. So this one talks about how things change when you have a child. Both texts show things changing for new parents. Text 1 says, everything was starting at once. And text 2 identifies that pregnancy will bring about big changes to your relationship. Okay, so this one's a bit better because you've identified what's happening in text 1 and 2, and then you've given evidence. Okay. All right, so the words that we've used here are equally. However, because obviously we want to show that we've used a word, even though it's not necessarily meaning that we're going to compare, it usually does. We've used that word there to state that we're going to move on. We've also used whereas, okay, both, and unlike. Okay, so some good words there that are used to compare and contrast. As we go through the exam questions, I will show you different words that are also being used in order to compare and contrast, and you can take those down in your notes as well so that you've got some more vocabulary when it comes to doing the final exam. Okay, so let's just have a look at some examples of question 7a. So what I've done here is I've taken 4 different 7a questions from different papers over a few years, and we're just going to look at how they look and how similar they are. So if we look at example 1 just here, it says here that the 2 texts show how pregnancy can change relationships. What similarities do couples share in these extracts? Use evidence from both texts to support your answer. So for the first example, it's asking you to talk about similarities that couples share when discussing pregnancy and how it changes relationships. Okay, so looking at similarities. If we look at example 2, it says the 2 texts show singers who are memorable. What similarities do Milton and Bessie share in these extracts? Use evidence from both texts. So again, you're looking at similarities between 2 people or 2 extracts. Example number 3 says the 2 texts show the experiences of astronauts returning to Earth. What similarities do these experiences share in these extracts? Use evidence from both texts to support your answer. And finally, the 4th example, the 2 texts show people experiencing change. What similarities do the writers share in these extracts? Use evidence from both of the texts. So we can safely say that question 7a is all about similarities. Okay? Yes, they're about different topics, but they are all about similarities. Now, in a minute, when we go into detail on one of these questions and look at sample answers, we're actually going to look at this one. You can download the paper from the link below the video, so please go ahead and do that. And if you want to have a go at answering the questions now, you can, or you can kind of go through it with me as I go through the video. Okay, so 7a is always, every year when students have sat this paper, it's about similarities. So you've got to prepare yourself for writing about how 2 texts are similar. Let's just have a look at 7b examples. Okay, so 7b talks about, well, let's look at example 1. We'll see how they are similar. Compare how the writers of text 1 and text 2 present ideas and perspectives about relationships. Support your answer with detailed references to the texts. So the first example is about relationships, but it wants you to compare how the writers of text 1 and text 2 present ideas and perspectives and use references to the text. Example B says, compare how the writers of text 1 and text 2 present ideas and perspectives about singers, using references from the text. Example 3 says to compare how the writers of text 1 and text 2 present ideas and perspectives about space travel. Support your answer with detailed references to the text. And then finally, the fourth one, compare how the writers of text 1 and text 2 present ideas and opinions about possessions. Support your answers with detailed references to the text. So as you can see, it's all about comparisons. I'm going to write this down. So 7b is all about comparing ideas and perspectives. We need to use both texts and we need to reference. Okay, we need to use quotes from the text to back up our opinions. Well, back up what we've decided to write about. Okay? All right. So what we're going to do now is we're going to read through both of these texts and we are going to pick out similarities, first of all for 7a, and then for 7b, we're going to try and pick out comparisons between ideas and perspectives. Now we're going to again look at this example just here about space travel. Okay, so we are looking at 7a, this one. The two texts show the experiences of astronauts returning to Earth. What similarities do these experiences share in these extracts? Use evidence from both texts to support your answer. And then we're going to look at 7b. Compare how the writers of text 1 and text 2 present ideas and perspectives about space travel. Support your answer with detailed references to the text. Okay? Now, if you don't want me to read through these texts, that's fine. Just fast forward me until you get to the right section. And you can go through your answers, especially if you've already done it. Now, be careful because just so you know, 7a is worth 6 marks. Oops. Sorry, that's not what I wanted. Okay, it's worth 6 marks. Okay, that's 7a. That means you're looking at writing about 3 points, 3 similarities with some quotes from the text. Okay, I'm just saying this now, so if you are going to have a go before I go through the answers, then you know. And then here, this is worth 14 marks. You're probably thinking of writing about 6 or 7 points with evidence from the text, or you could probably write 5 really good comparisons with good evidence. Okay, I will show you the mark scheme at the end and what you need to do to get these marks and what answers will be coming up. Okay, so if you want to pause the video now or leave it playing whilst I read through and you have a go at answering the questions, then go ahead and do that. And then once you get to the bit where you want to, you can press play and go through the answers. All right, so I'm going to read through both texts now. Some people like it when you read through, so I'm going to do that. Again, fast forward if you don't want it, and then we'll go through the answers. Okay, so here is text 1. This extract is from Return to Earth by Edwin Buzz Aldrin and Wayne Wargar in 1973. This is an edited extract from an autobiography written by the American astronaut Buzz Aldrin. Aldrin is writing about the return to Earth of Apollo 11, the first spacecraft to land humans on the moon. We floated down through a bank of clouds as big and lush as the ocean they covered. The change was impressive. I had become so accustomed to seeing the starkness of space, where there is no haze and where definitions are quite sharp, that the sensation of looking out on a hazy early morning on Earth was a welcome change. I could see the ocean below, and as I looked at it, I sniffed to smell it. Not yet. The sensation caused by the change of scenery pales beside the sensation of getting used to the fact of weight. For a number of minutes, movement is an effort. Arms, which had floated before, now hung heavily and had to be willed to movement. Legs, which are about as necessary to space travel as an appendix is to a body, stirred to activity by threatening not to function at all. We landed with all the grace of an old freight elevator. Airbus had announced to us that the wave height was between 3 and 4 feet, but it looked more like 13 or 14, and it felt like it too. Our chutes, tilting in the wind, brought us in at one angle, and the moon, governor of the tides, sent a wave our way from an opposing angle. With an enormous thwack, as jarring as it was noisy, we landed. Before the impact, my hand rested on circuit breakers, which when pushed in would enable Mike to jettison our chutes. After impact, my hand was jammed painfully down beside me. All of us grunted in distress. I grabbed the circuit breakers and Mike jettisoned the chutes. The Apollo spacecraft is a marvel of engineering. It is totally life-supporting, a mini-planet containing all facilities necessary for maintaining life. It also floats, whether right side up or upside down. There is no way to determine which way you'll end up after landing, especially in a good wind and a delayed chute jettison. It brings a smile now, but at the time it wasn't quite so amusing. There we were, officially taking our position in the history books of mankind, floating upside down in the Pacific Ocean. It was July 24th, 1969. The water was dark green and unfriendly, but its mist seeping in smelled good. We bobbed around for 7 minutes, the amount of time it takes the float bag motors to pump air into the float bags, 3 little balloons which would turn us upright. Airboss, Apollo 11. Everyone okay inside? Our checklist is complete. Awaiting swimmers. Neil radioed. Airboss came right on and told us 3 swimmers were already in the water and our flotation collar would be attached in less than 2 minutes. It was over. No exclamations, no slaps on the back, no handshakes. All that would come later, at least the handshakes. We sat in silence, 3 men alone together with their private thoughts. Okay, so that's the end of text 1. It then just goes on to explain these 2. Airboss is the nickname given to the Naval Air Force. Okay, so that's who they're talking to over the communication, the comms, I guess. And jettison just means to release or discard. So wherever you see, if I just go back, wherever you see like something like this, these little stars, it's showing you that at the end of the page, it will explain what that means. So if you're not sure, and that's what they've done here. Okay, we should have done my highlighting the other way. Okay, so that's text 1. So let's go through text 2, and then we'll start on the questions. Text 2. Extract from Space UK 2016 from the UK Space Agency. This edited extract is taken from issue 46 of a magazine offering the latest space sector news. The issue reports on the return to Earth of British astronaut Tim Peake. British European Space Agency, ESA, astronaut Tim Peake's Principia expedition to the International Space Station, ISS, came to an end on 18th of June with the landing of his spacecraft in Kazakhstan. Incredible, said Tim Peake, describing his descent to Earth in a spacecraft after 186 days on the ISS. Some astronauts have likened the experience to going over Niagara Falls in a flaming barrel. Peake, however, described it as the best ride I've been on ever. Down to Earth. Peake's return flight to Earth was one of the most dangerous parts of his mission. Strapped in next to Russian commander Yuri Malenchenko and NASA astronaut Tim Kopra, the crew had undocked from the ISS some 3.5 hours earlier. After moving slowly from the ISS, they fired thrusters to take them out of orbit on a trajectory towards Earth. And as you can see here, there's a star, so it's going to explain what trajectory is at the end of the text. And it just means like a route or a direction. The spacecraft entered the atmosphere at some 28,000 kilometers per hour. The craft's heat shield is tilted towards the direction of re-entry so that it can handle temperatures of up to 1,600 degrees Celsius generated by friction as it pushes through atmospheric gases. This is a bumpy and uncomfortable ride for the astronauts, who are forced back into their seats by G-forces of 4 or 5 times Earth's gravity. 10 kilometres above the ground, the spacecraft has already slowed considerably and parachutes open for the final descent to Earth. Just before it hits the Earth, retro rockets fire to reduce the impact speed to 5 kilometres per hour. This is still quite a jolt for the astronauts on board, who have spent 6 months in a weightless environment. After being helped out of the spacecraft, the British astronaut's joy at being back on Earth was clear. The smells of Earth are so strong, he said, it's wonderful to be back in the fresh air. Dripping with sweat in his spacesuit, he told waiting reporters he was looking forward to seeing his family and was hoping for a pizza and cold beer. He was, though, going to miss the view of the Earth from space and couldn't wait to go back. After being checked out by doctors, Peake boarded a flight to the European Astronaut Centre at Cologne in Germany, where he was reunited with his family. Now, I did check the pronunciation of this because I wasn't entirely sure. I kept pronouncing it Cologne, but I think it's Cologne. Although Peake's time in space is over, for now at least, this is by no means the end of his mission. The astronaut will spend the coming months taking part in debriefs about the flight. He will also undergo medical tests and rehabilitation training to see how his body has been affected by his time in space. It can take astronauts up to a year to regain their full fitness after 6 months in microgravity. Studies into the effects of spaceflight are crucial if humans are ever to venture further from Earth on long-duration missions to destinations such as Mars. Meet the media. 3 days after landing, a refreshed-looking Peake appeared in front of a packed press conference in Cologne to be greeted by cheers from friends, colleagues and the media. "I would do it again in a heartbeat," Peake said of his mission. And here it tells you what trajectory means, and it was route. Okay, so we have looked at both texts. I'm hoping that as we've gone through those, you've written down some similarities and some differences in order to be able to answer the questions quickly and efficiently. Okay, so looking at question 7a, again, I hope you've got these pages in front of you. It would be ideal if you did. 7a wants us to look at similarities of the experiences, okay, and use evidence from both texts. Now here are the responses that you should have had, obviously not all of them. You only need about 3 of them, okay? So let me just grab a pen. So about 3 or 4 sentences, sorry, that's meant to say, sentences, okay, with evidence from the text, okay? Evidence from the text, all right? So let's have a look at these examples then. The first point you could have used was that both experiences use sensations. So both texts have discussed sensations. Because in the question, I'm just going to point out, it says these experiences, okay? As you can see in the answers, they've used the same kind of wording. Both experiences use sensations rather than both texts. I mean, I don't think they'd deduct marks for that, but if you use the word texts, but both experiences use sensations. Okay, so they've said both, meaning that they are talking about both. They are using a similarity. Aldrin sees the change from stark space to the ocean and says the water smelled good. And here is the reference to the text. He has taken a piece of writing from the text and added it into the sentence. And in text 2, Pete comments on the smells and the fresh air. Okay, I haven't actually used a quote for the second point. I would recommend that you do. I'd put in a quote there. Okay, so use something from the text, some of the wording that he taught. Take some of the sentence from the text to just back that up a little bit extra. Another one you could have said was, both experiences are safe. Aldrin says the Apollo spacecraft is a marvel of engineering. It is totally life-supporting. And in text 2, the craft's heat shield is tilted towards the direction of re-entry so that it can handle temperatures of up to 1600 degrees. So they're saying how both experiences are safe. This one said how both experiences use sensations. This one says both experiences show an impact on the astronauts. So how did space impact the astronauts? Okay, so the first one, movement is an effort. My hand was jammed painfully down beside me. That was from text 1. All of us grunted in distress. Make sure, again, something that's probably missing there is text 1 or Buzz mentions Okay, because you want to make sure that the reader or the examiner knows exactly which bit you're talking about, so I would write that there. Text 1, or Buzz mentions, movement is an effort. My hand was jammed painfully down beside me. All of us grunted in distress. Okay, and in text 2, a bumpy and uncomfortable ride for the astronauts. Quite a jolt for the astronauts on board. Okay. And then the fourth example says, both experiences show the necessity of technical expertise in the language they use. Okay, so both texts have used certain language that you would only use. This is probably called jargon because it's language used by the astronauts specifically, and we call that jargon. Yeah, so profession related language. Okay, so science or astronaut jargon. Okay. And then they've quoted, circuit breakers jettisoned the chutes, float bag motors pump air into the float bags. Again, just mention that that's from text 1. And text 2, fired thrusters to take them out of orbit on a trajectory. So there is language used in there that we might not know what it meant, which is why they gave those little stars and told us what it meant at the end. Another point to mention is that if you want to use more than one quote, that's fine. Can you see here how they've done that if I do that in a different colour? They've put circuit breakers and they've quoted it, comma, jettisoned the I can't say that word, can I? Jettisoned the chutes, comma, float bag motors, and then they've used these 3 dots, ellipses there, because they've missed out part of the sentence. You don't have to write the whole thing. You just want to write the bits that relate to what you're talking about. So you can put little ellipses and then continue the quote, pump air into the float bags. Okay? So you don't need to write float bag motors and then continue the sentence all the way through to pump air into the float bags. It might take you too long. So if you just want to write down float bag motors because that's the language that you're trying to show that you don't know, or that it's technical jargon relating to that profession, and then put the 3 dots and then put pump air into the float bags because it relates back to what you've just said and you only need to use those small bits to make your point. Okay, so you're allowed to do that. You don't have to write the whole thing. And in text 2, fired thrusters to take them out of orbit on a trajectory. Okay? Now, another example. Both focus on measurements such as heat, speed, distance and time. Aldrin says how they bobbed around for 7 minutes, while text 2 states 186 days, 28,000 kilometers per hour, and up to 1600 degrees centigrade. Celsius, sorry. Centigrade. And again, they have used bobbed around for 7 minutes, meaning one quote, and then while text 2 states 186 days, comma, 28,000 kilometers per hour, comma, and up to 1600 degrees. So again, you've not had to write loads of the sentence, you've just used 3 very small quotes there to make your point. Okay, right, so now a few more examples of 7A answers. Again, you want to have 3 or 4 of these. So you don't just want one, you want at least 3 or 4 of these bullet points. Let's have a look at just a few final ones. Both experiences describe the change in gravity. Aldrin says the sensation caused by the change of scenery pales beside the sensation of getting used to the fact of weight. Again, if you didn't want to write all of that, you could just write sensation of getting used to the fact of weight. It still makes your point. You don't need to write that entire sentence. It's quite a lot. And text 2 says this is still quite a jolt for the astronauts on board who have spent 6 months in a weightless environment. So you can see how they are very similar there. Again, pointing out which bits are from each text. So you can either say text 1 and text 2, or there they've used Aldrin. Buzz Aldrin says, whatever. The next example, both experiences show the astronauts to be reliant on technology to help them land. Very good point. There is no way to determine which way you'll end up after landing, especially in a good wind and a delayed chute jettison. They also use another quote, so if I just show you there, they've used a quote here, going all the way to there, semicolon, the float bag motors, and then they've used an ellipses just there because they didn't want to write the whole sentence. Pump air into the float bags, another ellipses because again it's probably quite a long sentence and you don't want all of it, would turn us upright. Okay, so again it might be a really, really long section of text and you just want to pick out the little bits that you need, so you can just use those ellipses to show that you've missed a bit out. And that's fine. And then text 2 identifies retro rockets fire to reduce the impact speed to 5 kilometers per hour. Okay, so both experiences show the astronauts to be reliant on technology to help them. Next one, both experiences show that the astronauts feel positive about the return, which is true. Looking out on a hazy early morning on Earth was a welcome change. Okay, again, they've not mentioned that that's from text 1. So text 1 states, or Aldrin talks about, something like that. Just make it very clear so the examiner can see. And then text 2, the British astronauts' joy at being back on Earth was clear. And then finally, the last one for this, both texts show that the experiences will have a longer term impact on the astronauts. In text 1, all that would come later, at least the handshakes. And in text 2, it can take astronauts up to a year to regain their full fitness. Okay, so those are all examples of 7A, and you needed to have about 3 or 4 of those. So I hope you managed to pick those out, at least in some detail, even if not as in much detail as that. Now, when you are doing 7A, these are the, let me just rub out these are the marks that you will need to get. Now, you can't actually get higher than a 3 on this question, which I know it seems unfair, but you want to try and do as well as you can. You want to try and get all 6 marks. And if you look at level 3, which is what you need, sorry, my bad. Look at level 3, which is what you need detailed understanding of similarities, detailed synthesis of the 2 texts. So a detailed understanding and being able to summarise the information from the texts, which is what's happened in those examples. So if you go through those examples, you will see that they have simplified and summarised the experiences into bullet points. Okay, and that's what you need to be able to do. You need to summarise it and then use some evidence from the text. The selection of evidence is appropriate and relevant to the points being made. Again, those quotes in there are your evidence, and that is how you'll get maximum marks, by putting in evidence from each text to back up your point. And that will give you the entire 6 marks. So please try and get all of those marks in there. Okay, so let's have a look at 7B then. Remember, 7B is about comparing how the writers of text 1 and text 2 present ideas and perspectives about space travel. So this can be really broad. It can be anything to do with, basically any idea about space travel that might be similar or different. Okay, so it doesn't have to be the same. It can be a difference as well. And it can be about any perspectives that they may have. So how they feel something was, or how they viewed something. And we have to use references to both of the texts to do this. So the first example discusses both texts and the importance of space travel. Okay, both texts shows the importance of space travel. In text 1, the astronauts are officially taking a position in the history books of mankind. And in text 2, studies into the effects of spaceflight are crucial if humans are ever to venture further from Earth on long-duration missions to destinations such as Mars. So although they both discuss the importance of space travel, they do have differing opinions of why it's important. The first one talks about how it's their position in history, So, they're making history. But text 2 says that it's important because it's important if humans are ever going to venture further from Earth on long duration missions, such as going to Mars. Okay. So there you go, you've got 2 marks. Now I'm just reminding you that this is 14 marks for this question. So you're looking at 6 or 7 good points. 6 or 7 good points to make, or sentences with evidence from the text. Okay. The next example, both texts show that space travel involves a team. Text 1 identifies Mike and Airbus, and text 2 identifies Russian commander Yuri Malenchenko and NASA astronaut Tim Kopra. However, text 1 involves assumed knowledge of the team. Okay, so this example was good because it shows you how they have not only talked about both up here, they've also said another point that, you've just got to assume that there's a team involved. I mean, I think it was kind of assumed within the text that there was a team. And obviously they discussed Airbus, and once they'd landed and it wasn't just him, there was a team there, everybody was okay. So, they didn't talk about who the team was or anything like that. So they've just mentioned that there, assumed knowledge of the team. Okay. So that's quite a nice sentence. The next point says that both texts also show the loneliness involved in space travel, although in different ways. Okay, again, a very good example. They've both talked about how it's lonely, but they've talked about it in different ways, and then they go on to give you an example from each text. Text 1 demonstrates this through silence, whereas text 2 demonstrates this through words. Text 1, we sat in silence, 3 men alone together with their private thoughts. And text 2, he told waiting reporters he was looking forward to seeing his family. Okay, so a really good example there of a decent sentence and good marks. You've compared the 2 texts. You've said what they, what was involved, loneliness involved. Okay, the loneliness that was involved in space travel. And then given examples as to how you know that. Okay. Another answer you could have had was text 1 is a personal comment on space travel, told from the perspective of an astronaut, whereas text 2 is a third-person account. Now, again, that's not got any evidence from the text to support that, so you'd probably only get 1 mark for that sentence, which is fine. However, you want to make sure that you are trying to give as much evidence as possible to get your full marks. So if you wanted to add evidence for that, then obviously you should. Or, moving on to another example, the texts show the emotional effect of space travel. Text 1 shows the effect on the writer's feelings. It's impressive, a welcome change. It wasn't quite so amusing. Although text 2 uses quotations from Tim Peake. Incredible, the best ride I've been on ever. It's wonderful to be back. Okay, so that's a really good example there. So again, just be careful with this first one, a little bit too vague. You might want to add some evidence. The next example says that both texts use language. Now this was a good one. Both texts use language to show physical effects on the astronauts of space travel. Okay, so text 1 says an enormous thwack, as jarring as it was noisy, grunted in distress. And text 2 says bumpy and uncomfortable, forced back into their seats and dripping with sweat in his spacesuit. So you can take language from the text and say how those texts use it and compare that. Okay. And then another point that was quite nicely written, although each text shows the technical expertise involved, in space travel, the return journeys still end up being dangerous, showing that space travel has an element of risk. Okay. So again, these are just taken, I've just screenshot these from the mark scheme so you can see what they're expecting you to write down. So even though each text shows the technical expertise involved in space travel, the return journeys still end up being dangerous, showing that space travel has an element of risk. Again, you just need some evidence there to back that up. Feel like it wouldn't give you quite enough marks. Okay, final examples, 2 more for you. Both texts use measurement, but in different ways. Thought this was quite an interesting one. In text 1, it is used to build up the dangerous experiences. Airbus had announced to us that the wave height was between 3 and 4 feet, but it looked more like 13 or 14. And in text 2, it is used to give information. Entered the atmosphere at some 28,000 kilometers per hour. Again, a good sentence to 2 marks there at least. And then the last one, both texts mention days or dates to show evidence of timing of their missions. For historical record, it was July 24th, 1969, evidence for the first one. And then in text 2, 18th of June, 186 days. So here they've used 2 quotes, quote, comma, quote. Okay, just be careful to mention that this is from text 1. Okay. All right, so those examples are really good ways in which the 2 texts have used ideas or perspectives about space travel, and you've just compared how they've discussed them, how they're the same and how they're different. So it's a very broad answer. Now, in the mark scheme just here, I'm going to have to get rid of my thingamabob, my highlighting. Okay, if we look at level 5, because this is what we want really, isn't it? The response considers a varied and comprehensive range of comparisons between the 2 texts. Okay, so for a start, you've done 6 or 7 sentences with evidence for each one, plus evidence, okay? And you've picked out things that are similar and things that are different about the ideas and perspectives about space travel, okay? And if you picked out those things that were in the mark scheme, then you've done that. You've had an analysis of the writer's ideas and perspectives, including how the theme, language and or structure are used across the texts. So you could have talked about there, again, like they did talk about language a lot, so they said, you know, the type of language which was technical, or they used measurements. Okay, the theme or the structure, they definitely discussed whether it was a personal account or third person. Okay. Structure, one was written quite fluidly, a bit story-like. The other one was more of a bit more of a serious, well, I shouldn't really say serious, account, but, you know, it was very, very structured. Finally, references are balanced across both texts. They are discriminating and clarify the points being made. Again, as long as you're putting in evidence from each text to back up your point, then you will have done that as well. So just make sure that you're going through and you're picking out all of those different things that you can then write down as sentences and include references to that, okay? For example, if I just take that off for a second, we can use this as an example here, okay? So again, references are balanced across both texts. They are discriminating and clarify the points being made. Clarify the points being made, okay? Both texts use measurement, but in different ways. So you're mentioning what happened in both texts and how they were done differently. You've then said that in text 1, it is used to build up the dangerous experiences and given a reference. Airbus had announced to us that the wave height was between 3 and 4 feet, but it looked more like 13 or 14. And in text 2, it is used to give information. Entered the atmosphere at some 28,000 kilometers per hour. Okay, so you have done all of these things down here if you have written 6 to 7 sentences and used evidence from the text and tried to take a range of different types of differences. Differences that could involve language, differences that could involve structure, the way it's written, the times given, okay, and differences that involve the theme. Again, one being third person and one being a personal response or an autobiographical account, okay? So if you're finding it difficult to pick out differences and similarities, use that Venn diagram idea just whilst you're revising, because then you'll be able to do it quicker in the exam. Okay, so I am hoping then that today we have understood the words compare and contrast. Remember, comparing means to look at similarities and differences. A contrast is more of a difference, okay, maybe a bigger difference. You've learned some vocabulary. We've looked at some vocabulary, both those words that let me write some down again. I know it's difficult to always know the vocabulary. We've said both. We've said however, differently, okay. We also used the word, the phrase different ways. So both texts talked about measurements but in different ways. We can say whereas, okay, text 1 says this, whereas text 2 says that. Texts are similar. Text 1 discusses something, unlike text 2, which discusses something else. Okay. So within those different examples, there were plenty of ways in which the texts were compared. Okay. Most of the time, you're looking at using your quotes in order to show those comparisons. Your quotes and your references to the text will show those differences and similarities. Okay. We've looked at past exam questions, definitely. Specifically answering question A and 7B for the Edexcel English Language paper 2. So I really hope you found that useful and you're now able to go away and answer questions 7A and 7B of the English language paper with confidence. I know we're now towards the end of the academic year and you'll be going into the summer, which will give you some time if you need to do some revision ready for the new academic year in September. So thank you very much for using Cuba Education and for watching Compare and Contrast for GCSE English, and I really hope to see you again soon.